The power of the atom. The power of the human intellect. Dwight D. Eisenhower said in his 1953 speech, Atoms for Peace, where he addressed the United Nations General Assembly and had this reassurance to say about atomic weapons, and I quote, "To the making of these fateful decisions, the United States pledges before you, and therefore before the world, its determination to help solve the fearful atomic dilemma, to devote its entire heart and mind to finding the way by which the miraculous inventiveness of man shall not be dedicated to his death, but consecrated to his life." End quote. However, Albert Einstein warned us in an interview he did with Atlantic Monthly in 1945 that, and I quote, "The release of atomic energy has not created a new problem. It has merely made more urgent the necessity of solving an existing one. As long as there are sovereign nations possessing great power, war is inevitable." The bombing of Hiroshima didn't just physically detonate the land of Japan. It metaphorically detonated the understanding the world had about the scale of destruction we as a species are capable of. Science isn't the answer. It's yet a tool among many that can be used for good or evil. Mega Man, a symbol of justice, slow to engage in violence, but quick to fight for what's right. Mega Man is a product of good science and of evil science. We all have a root of evil within us, passed down to us from the triumphs and sins of our fathers. So too does Mega Man carry with him the legacy and consequences of the pursuit of scientific advancement. Greetings, I'm Old Man Zoo, and this is the symbolism of Mega Man. So before we really dive into the symbolism of Mega Man, kind of do what I did the last time with Castlevania and talk about some of the different versions of Mega Man. So Mega Man was released in 1987. There's been a couple of remakes of the original Mega Man. It was included in Mega Man The Wily Wars, which if memory serves, that was a Sega Genesis game. And then you had a couple of different Mega Man compilations since then. You've got the Rockman Complete Works, Mega Man Legacy collections, and then there's actually a Mega Man for DOS, which I have. I tinkered around with it a little bit, but it is, other than sharing just the name with no sequel identifier, there's not a whole lot of similarities between Mega Man for DOS and the NES Mega Man. So just to kind of knock that out. So the first question you might be wondering is, it's certainly the first question I wanted to answer was, is Mega Man one word or two? It's two words. I don't know why this always confused me. Like anytime I type it out, I want to just type it out as one big word. It's two words. So I'm glad you guys asked that. I'm glad I could answer that. The second question is, who actually created Mega Man? So a lot of people say that it was Keiji Inafune who created Mega Man, and this is half right. So Keiji Inafune joined the Mega Man team, but the actual concept for Mega Man already existed before he joined the team. So the guy who actually conceptualized Mega Man, his name was Akira Kitamura, and basically, and Keiji Inafune has actually said as much. He said that he's only kind of half responsible for Mega Man. The actual conception of Mega Man came from Akira Kitamura. So there's an interesting interview with Akira Kitamura where he talks about sort of the influences that went into Mega Man, and he's got a kind of a litany of tokusatsu shows that he watched when he was a kid. And if you don't know what tokusatsu is, it's basically a style of anime show that features heavy special effects. So think about like Power Rangers or what's the other one? Kamen Rider. And then he also labeled off something that I thought was super fascinating, and it was Astro Boy. And so I've actually read a little bit of Astro Boy, and I really like Naoki Urasawa's Pluto, which is his take on Astro Boy. So if you haven't read that, highly recommend it. But what was so fascinating about Astro Boy is Astro Boy, if you didn't already know, was created by Osamu Tezuka. So what inspired Tezuka to create Astro Boy? There's an interview where Tezuka talks about the impact that the atomic bomb had on his country. There was fear and anxiety about what the power of atomic weapons meant for the future, not just of Japan, but of the world. Out of this fear, Tezuka wanted to paint an image of hope that this technology could be used to benefit mankind. He imagined a world powered by atomic energy, not destroyed by it. I found a great article, the link will be in the description, that discusses this interview and just the general insights that Tezuka had about the bomb. And I want to read a small passage from the article. Quote, "Just as the birth of an atomic energy as a technological, cultural, and political reality occurred through the sacrifice of the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so does the cartoon series found its narrative arc on death." What he had to say about that was that everyone around him was talking about just how frightened they were of atomic power, and it really inspired him to kind of take that fear and that collective anxiety and try to create a work of art to show people what this sort of unseen energy could actually do for people. And so that was the sort of genesis of Astro Boy. Astro Boy was meant to be a spark of hope. What could you do with atomic energy? Does it have to be a weapon, or could it be an embodiment of basically scientific prowess? And that is essentially where Astro Boy, where his conception came from. And so I thought it was interesting that Mega Man has as an inspiration Astro Boy, and Astro Boy has an inspiration as the atomic bomb. And so you've got this through line of atomic energy and a reluctant robot, because Astro Boy, if you've read any of the manga, he's sort of a reluctant hero. He doesn't want to have to fight, but he often finds himself in situations where he does have to fight. And with Mega Man, now in the first game, we don't get a whole lot of characterization for Mega Man, but if you're a fan of the series, you know that Mega Man has a lot of reluctance when it comes to violence. He does not like having to fight his fellow robots, but he does so in the name of justice. So I wanted to kind of list off some of the Astro Boy characters and kind of draw some parallels between Astro Boy, the Astro Boy universe, and the Mega Man universe. So this is pretty interesting. So in the canon of Astro Boy, you have a scientist by the name of Umataro Tenma, who was responsible for the creation of Astro Boy. Astro Boy was so kind of back up a little bit. So Tenma's son, Tobio, dies in an accident, and he's so grief-stricken that he creates Astro Boy as sort of a way to handle his grief and almost as a replacement for his son, which is kind of messed up. And so he creates Astro Boy, but then once he starts interacting with Astro Boy, he realizes that this is never going to be an adequate replacement, and that so now he's kind of saddled himself with this constant reminder of the loss that he's experienced, and it kind of depends on which version of Astro Boy you're reading. In the earlier comics, he's kind of a gray character. In some comics, he's a villain, and in other comics, he's kind of an ally. And so there's a bit of Dr. Light and a bit of Dr. Wily kind of intertwined into Tenma's character. And so another scientific character from Astro Boy is Professor Hiroshi Ochanomizu. And so this guy, and it's almost universal across all of the different runs of Astro Boy, he is almost always a good character. He's typically characterized as a paternal figure. So when Astro Boy is essentially cast out and sold to a circus, it is Professor Ochanomizu who goes in and rescues Astro Boy and sort of raises him as his own son. And so whereas Tenma is sort of kind of half Dr. Light, half Dr. Wily, I would argue that Professor Ochanomizu is a kind of a full analog to Dr. Light. So I thought that was interesting. So there's already we've got three strong sort of mimetic seeds for what would become Mega Man. So you've got Dr. Light, Dr. Wily, and Mega Man himself. And so if we keep looking at the Astro Boy roster, another character that might ring some bells is Uran. Uran is essentially a female counterpart to Astro Boy, and she has basically direct parallel to Roll, and Roll is essentially Mega Man's sister, basically. And before Mega Man becomes Mega Man, he's essentially a domestic servant and a domestic sort of a lab assistant to Dr. Light. And so both Rock and Roll, which there's a kind of a through line of musical terminology that's used throughout the Mega Man series. They both work with Dr. Light as sort of lab assistants, and so you've got a genesis for the character Roll, and then basically you even have a very similar origin. So if you take a look at the manual, I'm going to be reading from the U.S. manual. So keep in mind that if you have looked at the U.S. manual, you'll see that they call Dr. Light Dr. Wright, W-R-G-H-T. This was probably a translation error, because often R's and L's often got kind of flipped around just depending on who was doing the translating. So I'm going to just refer to Dr. Wright as Dr. Light just to kind of resolve any confusion there. But this is from the U.S. manual. It says, brilliant scientist Dr. Wright conceived the construction of fully operational human-like experimental robots to perform specific everyday duties. Dr. Wright and his assistant, Dr. Wily, encouraged with their very first near-human robot, Mega Man, says in bold characters, proceeded to develop 6 additional humanoids, all programmed to perform prescribed rituals. So already right there in the manual, we see that both Dr. Wright and Dr. Wily are involved in the creation of Mega Man. And Mega Man is this just this amazing near-human robot. And so if we go on, the manual says, but with the exception of Mega Man, all of Dr. Light's near-human robot experimentation went awry. Assistant Dr. Wily turned disoil, reprogramming Dr. Light's humanoids, now bent on destroying opposition, so Dr. Wily could control the world and its resources. Resisting reprogramming, Mega Man is chosen the defender of the universe and its inhabitants. Mega Man dares to single-handedly penetrate 7 separate empires of Monsteropolis, eliminating the leaders and followers of these sovereignties. Get ready for some very exciting challenges. And so, just a quick note, you heard me refer to the city as Monsteropolis. This is actually, from my knowledge, this is the only place that the city in Mega Man is named Monsteropolis. I believe, I'm almost certain it's called something different, but we will try to keep ourselves contained to game scope and keep ourselves sort of restrained to this specific city in the Mega Man universe. And so when I talk about Monsteropolis, I'm talking about the city that you're doing all the fighting in. And so I thought it was interesting that Dr. Wily does attempt to reprogram Mega Man, but Mega Man somehow resists this attempt. But his fellow robot masters are unable or maybe unwilling to resist the programming, and they become corrupted, and they now serve Dr. Wily. So in the same way that Dr. Light and Dr. Wily created Mega Man, there's a direct analog to that in the Astro Boy mythos, where we talk about Ochanomizu and Tenma were friends and colleagues, which is sort of hinted at with Dr. Light and Dr. Wily being friends and colleagues. So if we back up just a second here, we've already got sort of an analog. So in the manual, it's clear that Dr. Light and Dr. Wily knew each other. They worked together. They were colleagues. And in that same way, Astro Boy, Ochanomizu and Tenma were friends and colleagues. However, Astro Boy, from what I can tell from the lore, was the sole creation of Tenma, but he was heavily influenced later on, and by he I mean Astro Boy was heavily influenced by Ochanomizu later on, just directly, but just because Ochanomizu served as Astro Boy's father, because his actual creator abandons him. And so you've got sort of this theme of a good father and an evil father. In Astro Boy, it's the same for Mega Man. Mega Man has a good dad and a bad dad, and so I thought that was an interesting comparison, because in a lot of ways we as people have that same sort of dichotomy. You might have two great parents. You might have one awesome parent and one not so awesome parent. You might not even know who your parents are. We all sort of carry the legacy of our parents within us, whether we like it or not. And so I think Mega Man is the same way, in that he's got the legacy of justice and fighting for what's right from Dr. Light, but he's also got this curse that he's going to always have to fight his fellow robots, and that's as a result of Dr. Wily. So there's a good side and a dark side to Mega Man, and we'll touch more on Mega Man's dark side a little bit later on, but I just wanted to kind of bring that up now. So let's move on to a different inspiration for Mega Man mentioned by Akira Kitamura. He talks about a series called Casshern, which I've not read. I did quite a bit of research, and it's on my to watch list because it looks really cool. So that's going to be something that I pick up. But when I was looking and reading into what Casshern was, it is basically you can very strongly see how Casshern influenced Mega Man. So you've got Dr. Kotaro Azuma creates a robot. This robot goes out of control, and this robot, in case you're wondering, his name is Breaking Boss, or at least he goes by Breaking Boss. He goes out of control, and he causes other robots to go out of control. So already we've got kind of a similar sort of setup where you've got a robot created by a doctor, and then that robot goes out of control. And then you have Dr. Kotaro Azuma's son, Tetsuya Azuma, volunteers to become a robot. He actually starts out as a human and then is essentially converted into sort of this android guy. So that was really interesting. So you've already got another analog in that Mega Man was a domestic servant or a lab, basically built for peaceful purposes, and then he volunteers. Or, in the manual it says that he was chosen, so it makes you think either he volunteered because he is the destined one, or maybe Light didn't give him a choice, which is kind of an interesting thing. Now we know later on in the series that Mega Man voluntarily, if not reluctantly, goes into battle and to save the day. And so in that same vein, Tetsuya Asuma does the same kind of thing. And so when he becomes a cyborg, he takes on this new identity, Casshern, the same way that when Rock, that's sort of his domestic servant name, takes on the mantle of justice, he becomes Mega Man. Tetsuya Asuma becomes Casshern. And what's interesting is that, and this is sort of outside the scope of the first Mega Man, but Casshern has a robotic dog companion. And if you play them later in Mega Mans, you know exactly who this is an analog to, and that would be Rush, the little red robot companion dog. And even more interesting is that this idea, this meme of a robot boy and his robot dog, like that gets carried on further. That gets carried on a lot further. If you're a Metal Gear fan, you already know where I'm going with this. I'll just flash on the screen because I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I want to cover Metal Gear in its own video eventually. But that meme of robot boy and dog, like that echoes forward, not just into Mega Man, but into other things as well. So I thought that was great. And also, just as another bonus here, we've got a robot bird named Swanee, who I thought looked a lot like Beat. And Beat, again, not from Mega Man 1, but he doesn't show up, or he or she, I don't know if Beat is supposed to be a male bird or a female bird, but either way, Beat is a robotic bird companion to Mega Man. Again, I'm breaking my own rules about not reaching outside the game, but that was just too interesting. That was just too cool not to mention. And then finally, there is Luna Kozuki, is a female robot, serves as a support for Casshern, and this is yet another reference or another analog to Roll. And I keep bringing up Roll. I know she only shows up very briefly in Mega Man 1, but it's interesting that all of this lore, kind of seeing where the roots of it came from. And so now we've got Astro Boy, who's inspired by the atomic bomb. We've got Casshern, which it wasn't clear exactly where the motivations or the influences for Casshern came from, but either way, the origin story is very, very similar. You can see exactly where Kitamura was inspired to create Mega Man from these two things. And then finally, I looked into a couple of his other influences that he mentions. He talks about a show called Time-Pon. Again, it's the same sort of setup. You've got a character called Dr. Kikdaider. He creates a time machine, but he becomes lost in time. So already we've got Dr. Kikdaider, probably an analog to Dr. Light. And then you've got Tom-Pon, who is Kikdaider's assistant. Stop me if you've heard this before. He takes up the mantle of the hero and sets out to rescue the doctor. And then you've also got Junko, which is Kikdaider's grand doctor, joins Tom-Pon, this yet another analog to Roll. And then you've got the time skeletons, which are basically, they're the antagonist of the series, but they kind of pilot mechs that look like the Robot Masters, or at least kind of have a visual style similar to the Robot Masters, and even the Time-Pon characters themselves seem to have a kind of, or more visually similar to Mega Man, at least I thought. So I've got two more influences I wanted to talk about. One of them is Kikdaider. Again, very similar sort of idea where a man takes on a robotic form and fights bad guys. Whereas Kikdaider has a identity struggle of whether he is a man or a machine. Mega Man, later on in the series, he's more struggling with his peaceful nature and the fact that he's constantly having to fight his fellow robots. And also, it's interesting that Kikdaider is he kind of wanders around in the manga. He wanders around and actually even in the show, if you watch all the clips from the show, he wanders around with the guitar and he's constantly playing guitar. So I thought that was an interesting link to sort of a link between robots and music, and the fact that Mega Man has a rich and storied tradition of using sort of musical jargon within the series, and the fact that the music itself in Mega Man is just so dang cool. Like I tend to listen to the music for games that I'm writing scripts for, and it was just an utter joy listening to all of these old chiptunes that I had to listen to in quite some time. I will touch back on Kikdaider again shortly when we talk about the title sequence, because I think there was definitely some influence there. But one more thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of influences was a show that Kitamura mentions called Ninja Captor. So Ninja Captor, there's actually, if you're interested in seeing this, it was a tokusatsu show. And it basically features a bunch of ninjas that are tied to the elements. So you've got like a fire ninja and a water and a wind ninja. But what I actually watched the first episode, which you can watch for free on Toei's World channel. They actually have a couple of different of these old shows that you can watch like the first couple of episodes. But what was so great about it is the visual style. These guys basically dress up like Mega Man before Mega Man was Mega Man. So you can see another very strong, at least visual influence for not just Mega Man, but even the Robot Masters. They look like they were taken directly from the show, just in terms of like, and we'll go into more in depth, but if you look at Fireman or Elecman or Iceman, like these guys look like they are, pixel version of the Ninja Captor characters. So I thought that was a joy to watch and to make that connection. I was like, oh, this is really cool. So we've tackled the sources that influenced the creation of Mega Man, but before I dive into the actual game, I wanted to talk about a handful of themes that we're going to echo back to over and over in this video. There's a theme of turning tragedy into hope via justice. Wily betrays his friend and colleague, steals the fruits of his labor, and sets about taking over Monsteropolis. The theme of reluctance to violence. I'll admit I broke GameScope for this one since there's no direct implication that Mega Man hates violence or is reluctant to fight like we see much later in the series, but I think I can make a case for it just the same using just the symbols that we see in the game. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, game scope is a term I coined where we try to just limit our analysis of the game we're talking about, in this case Mega Man, to just the contemporary media that was released with the game, like manuals, game cutscenes, box arts, even interviews that happened at the time. I tried my best to resist breaking the scope, but as you'll see, this won't be the only time I creep out of this scope. Next is the theme of the evil eye. I'll go into this more later, but I'm just bringing it up now. And finally, the idea that the more human-looking a particular robot is, the more likely that robot was meant to interact directly with humans. The less human-looking the robot is, the more likely that robot was meant to never interact with humans. We'll revisit this more later as we come across it. Okay, so we've talked about some of the main themes that I feel are in this game, just from the setting that Kitamura and Inafune give us. What I wanted to talk about, well, let's just start right at the start, right at the title screen. So I kind of touched on this earlier, but Kikdaider, if you look at the Kikdaider kind of color scheme, that he's sort of a mixture of red and blue. And when I was trying to kind of figure out where this title came from, right? Like there's always some kind of influence. You can generally look at somebody's creative efforts and you can kind of pick apart and figure out what inspired them, especially if they outright state it, which Kitamura was kind enough to do. He was kind enough to share his influences, which I think is great, because we're all influenced by something. And so looking at Kikdaider, looking at the motif he chose for the title screen, it's right there. You've got this red and blue logo that has sort of this, at least from the color scheme, at least looks very cool. And if you were a fan of Kikdaider and then went on to play Mega Man, you would probably, at least unconsciously, you would have made some kind of archetypical connection. The other thing I think is interesting is that if we talk about sort of the other father of Mega Man, if we talk about Inafune mentioned that he was inspired by American comics when it came to designing some of the robot masters. And so if you look at old comics that came out before 1987, basically 70s X-Men, man, that title just looks like, that Mega Man title looks like it could have come right off the cover of an X-Men comic. It's got the same sort of slanted, blocky characters and even a similar shade of blue. And so can't help but wonder if that was also an influence to this title screen. So now that we're past the title screen, but before we really dive into the game, because as soon as you press start, I mean, it throws up, the Robot Master selection screen. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about Mega Man and his design, and perhaps what the symbolism behind that design could mean. So first off, let's just talk about Mega Man's outward appearance. He's basically a little blue dude, right? His armor is blue, and they're actually different shades of blue. Now, if you read the interview with Kitamura, he said that he originally wanted Mega Man to be white, and that was because he wanted Mega Man to sort of be a blank slate that would make the weapon changes that he gathers later in the game more apparent. And he ended up, he said he basically compromised to the color blue just so Mega Man would be easier to see, because having a purely white character would have made Mega Man less distinct. And so that's why Mega Man kind of has a mixture of blue and light blue. It's because he was originally meant to be white. Now, the symbolism of the color white, if you're familiar with any color symbolism at all, you'll know that white is typically the color of good, of righteousness, of justice. When doing a little bit more deeper dive on the color blue, especially as it applies to kind of the good guys, is that blue, and light blue in particular, is a symbol of the hero, which is great. So Kitamura actually talks about how he believes that heroes should have virtue, which I thought, I mean, it seems kind of obvious, but if you look at recent media, probably since, I don't know, maybe the 1980s, it seems like there's this fascination with the anti-hero, right? It's like, oh, the hero who breaks all the rules and is gruff and is kind of a jerk. Whereas Kitamura, he believed in the more classic hero trope, whereas heroes should be good, they should be moral, they should have virtue, which I thought was great. So Mega Man, right off the jump, was meant to be a moral character, and he's not. You could argue that his reluctance to violence is immoral because he should be willing to fight evil, but that's part of his character, part of his sort of innate pacifism, is that he doesn't want to hurt people, but he will for the sake of justice, and that is his virtue. So another interesting thing about the color blue is that it can also be a symbol of hope, which ties all the way back to Mega Man's sort of mimetic genesis with Astro Boy. Astro Boy was created as a avatar of hope out of Tezuka's desire for people not to be scared of atomic power necessarily, but to view it as a way to advance society in a technological way. So that I thought was all a cool tie-in. Now, again, with a lot of symbolism, a lot of interpreting symbolism, a lot of it is just looking at the threads, pulling on them, and seeing what you get. Because a lot of the times people don't know why they make the creative choices that they make. And so this is sort of my attempt to put a finger on what they might have been. So by no means is my interpretation of all this explicitly stated anywhere. It's just things that I've kind of look at and point at and say, hey, this could be where this came from. So let's move on to some of the things that Mega Man has right off the jump. Before he acquires any of the weapons from the bosses he fights, he just has his blaster. They don't really refer to it in the manual, either in the Japanese or English manual. Now we know later on that this weapon is referred to as the Mega Buster. So when you hear me talk about the Mega Buster, I'm just talking about the gun he starts out with. And by gun, I mean little arm cannon. So when I got to thinking more about the Mega Buster, I realized that it's actually a really humble weapon, and it's actually very befitting of Mega Man. Now, I'm not going into what the Mega Buster can do much later in the series. Like, you play Mega Man X, and this thing fires bullets the size of Mega Man. But we're just talking about Mega Man 1, and just the fact that his little arm cannon shoots out little tiny lemon-shaped bullets, and these bullets, he can only fire 3 at a time. And somehow I can imagine Mega Man and sort of think of his pathos and how his approach to getting into fights, and it seems appropriate that he would have like this humble weapon that is meant to reduce the amount of damage he can do, right? Like, he doesn't want to have to fight, and so if he is going to fight, he's going to take a weapon, a minimally viable weapon to achieve that purpose. He's not going to rush in with some giant gun that would level a city. He's only going to take what he thinks he needs to take. At least that's my interpretation of it. It's sort of a built-in reluctance from the weapon design down to the wielder himself. So maybe even Dr. Light, who presumably created this. And we know that Dr. Light has created military systems, and we'll get into that more. So Dr. Light's no stranger to creating weapons. And so what he outfits Mega Man with is sort of perhaps to placate Mega Man's own guilt. And then the other aspect that this weapon suggests is it suggests that Mega Man has some sort of near infinite power supply, because it's the only weapon he has that he can just fire forever, and he never runs out. In fact, it's intimately linked to his life. The only way that weapon stops firing is if he dies, right? So in essence, the weapon energy for the Mega Blaster is actually his life energy. And by Mega Blaster, I mean Mega Buster. That's probably not going to be the first time that I do that. So anyway, another interesting. So I remember reading an article long ago. I tried to find it for this video, but I simply just couldn't. But it was talking about the different jump heights for different video game characters, and Mega Man has one of the highest like default jump heights right out of the gate. Now we're not talking about like how in Metroid Samus Aran can basically jump infinitely. We're talking about just right out of the gate. What are these different characters' jump heights? And it's basically measured by the character's height. And so if we were to go back and look at Castlevania, we can see that, and I kind of measured this out. I played back my old footage in slow-mo, and I could see that Simon jumps roughly his own height, which is still pretty incredible. Like even the best athletes, even the most elite athletes, that's quite a feat. So if like Simon was 6 foot tall, then he could jump straight up into the air 6 feet. Like he could jump over his own self standing upright, which is pretty crazy. Well, Mega Man, who is from the sources that I looked at, his height is roughly 4 feet 4 inches. So that's basically the average height of a 12-year-old boy, which I found was in the census data, I believe. It says that, essentially the average height for a 12-year-old boy is 4 foot 10 inches. So Mega Man's up right around that height. Well, Mega Man can jump 3 times his own height. So imagine a little school kid, and that school kid can jump 3 times his own height. That's pretty incredible. So Mega Man is a very tall jumper, which suggests that he has very strong legs. And the reason I bring this up, and I'll bring it up again, I won't spoil this insight, if you can call it that, but just keep that in mind about his strong legs, because that's going to come up again. So before we really start diving into the individual levels, I wanted to knock out 2 of the item pickups you get in the game, because they're just gonna happen all the time. And so let's just talk about it now. The first major one is going to be the life energy pickup, which I might point it out as we go through the game footage. But the life energy is like it almost looks like a fuse. If you've ever seen an electrical engineering diagram, that's immediately what it reminded me of. And so not only does it look like a fuse, like if Mega Man is taking damage and he blows a fuse, you can almost envision him, opening up some sort of maintenance panel and tossing out the busted fuse and putting in a new fuse that he's taken from an enemy robot that he's just, shot with his Mega Buster, right? Like conceptually and logically, it makes sense that he's fighting these robots. When the robots are destroyed, they drop some parts that Mega Man can use to repair himself. And then on top of that, this life energy is yellow, which is a symbol of energy, but it's also a symbol of light, which is sort of at least kind of an etymological callback to Dr. Light, which I thought was interesting. And if you think about what is a fuse is put in place to protect the machine's components. Like it's designed to fail if there's some sort of power surge or some sort of failure in the flow of electricity. This is the part that's supposed to fail so you can easily replace it. So it makes sense that this thing could resemble a fuse and that you're essentially using that to replace lost life force or lost system energy. So with the weapon energy pickup, it's similar to the life energy, except instead of yellow light, it's a blue light. And if we kind of look at the symbolism of the color, not just the color blue, but as it applies to weapons or martiality, if you will, blue is often be a symbol of military discipline, which is interesting. So think the Navy or the police and how they are typically represented by a blue uniform. So in this same way, you've got this weapon energy, which is separate from Mega Man's primary energy source, and it's used explicitly to power the weapons that he's taken from his fellow robot masters. They run on a different weapon source, and you can kind of apply it to the sort of martial force that he uses these weapons for. And in this case, the purpose of his weapon is to protect society in the same way that you could argue that the Navy or the police would be there to protect society, or at least fight for some sort of ideal. Okay, so let's begin talking about the various robot masters. So the way I'm going to tackle this is it's going to be sort of a hybrid approach. So we're going to talk about the enemies as we first encounter them, with a couple of exceptions. And then as far as the bosses, we're just going to tackle them in the order that I played them through. And so the first boss that I picked, the first robot master, was Bomb Man, just because I think he's probably the easiest. You could argue that Cut Man is also pretty easy as far as, which boss is the easiest to take out with your Mega Buster. But for me, I chose Bomb Man. So right off the bat, when we warp into the level, I noticed what was kind of striking were these the structures in the background, these sort of orange structures that sort of sit on top of a pillar. And so immediately that kind of reminds me of Cloud City from Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. And so I kind of did a little bit of reading on to what is Cloud City in Star Wars. And Star Wars, Cloud City, it's an industrial city, and they harvest gas called Tabana gas, or maybe it's Tabana gas. And this is an industrial product that is used to power hyperdrives, blasters, all kinds of stuff in the Star Wars universe. And so that was my immediate sort of gut instinct when I saw these. And then also, if you look at the color of these buildings, they're orange, and orange happens to, if you look at the symbolism for sort of the industrial symbolism for the color orange, it can be the color of energy. And so these buildings appear to be sort of rooted in the ground, and perhaps they are extracting energy from the ground. So this seems to be some sort of maybe geothermal or some sort of high-tech energy extraction or energy processing of some kind. The manual, it mentions that Bomb Man is in charge of demolitions and land clearing for Dr. Light's new developments. And so this actually looks like sort of a brand new area with these kind of cutting-edge buildings all around. If you look at sort of the level itself, it looks like there's metal framework everywhere, like scaffolding, like they're like very common in new construction areas. You see these types of scaffolds everywhere. And something that kind of caught my attention was the fact that when you're playing as Mega Man, you can really scoot yourself towards the edge and basically grip the edge with your toe. And this sort of ties back to, and I said I was going to come back to it, Mega Man's insane leg strength. We talked about how high he can jump, but look at how strong his toe grip is. He can just support his entire body weight on the edge of his toes. And I'm obviously not the only person that's noticed this. If you look, I remember buying Shovel Knight back when it came out, and if you look through the manual, it talks about one of his special abilities being his insane toe grip, which I thought was funny because that's clearly Yacht Club kind of picked that out from one of the strange quirks of Mega Man, being able to support his entire body weight just by balancing on his toe. Like that's some crazy calf strength, ankle strength. Like that robot is built right. So if we keep going, we encounter our first enemy. It's called, at least in the English version, this is called the Flea. Now I'm gonna, as I approach each enemy, I'm going to explain sort of canonically what these enemies were meant to be, and my source for my canon is mostly from the Mega Man Powered Up version of this game. Is basically a remake of Mega Man 1, and they added a bunch of entries. I know this is breaking game scope, but I wanted to give some sort of context as to what the creators sort of retroactively called these things versus, and then after I kind of label off the canon, I'll label off what I think these probably are, and then we can kind of go from there. So canonically, these enemies were meant to drive away pests. They basically were chased down. I don't know what passes for pests in the land of 20XDX, but apparently that's a problem for when it comes down to land clearing, which is kind of strange because you would think that with Bomb Man he would just blow everything up. But apparently there was at least a humane approach to driving away animals inhabiting the land that they plan to clear for Dr. Light's new projects. So that's the canon explanation for what these things are. My thought was that because these things leap around so much, that they are designed to traverse uneven terrain, and even more, they almost look like a welding bit, like they're meant to kind of latch onto the side of buildings or to traverse into hard to reach areas and weld hard to reach areas, or like, run repairs or maybe do a quick build of scaffolding. And so that's kind of what I thought. Is like, if this thing had an industrial application, what would it look like? And the fact that this thing is the same size as Mega Man, it makes me think that that my interpretation is probably a little bit closer than what they came up with canonically. I think this thing has some sort of construction usage. It's some sort of, maybe it tests the integrity of buildings or scaffolding, or to make sure things are up to code. And if not, then it can perform on-site fabrication. It could also be used. The fact that they can kind of reach hard to reach places. This may be to access areas for strategic detonation, because a lot of times when you're trying to destroy a structure or clear land, you have to strategically blow up certain areas, so that way you can kind of control the chaos and control how things collapse, so that way you're not causing more damage than you intend to. Another kind of striking thing about this enemy is the color red, and in looking up on worktruckonline.com, it states that red is the second most common color for construction equipment. So that kind of ties back to my thought that this thing is actually meant for construction and not necessarily meant to be driving around or driving off rats or whatever passes for pests. So as we continue through this new land development, we come across the Bomb, or the Japanese version is the Bomb, which I thought was kind of funny. But the English version, they hacked off one of those oms. So it's just the Bomb. And this actually resembles something called the BLU-82, which was a land clearing bomb used in Vietnam. It was the initial design. It was meant to clear out heavily vegetated areas, jungle areas for helicopter landing zones. So they would, instead of going through and cutting down the trees themselves, they'd just blow up and clear a path for helicopters to land. It was basically, what made it so effective is that it had a huge blast radius, so you could clear out an area pretty effectively. But later on, this bomb was actually used for psychological warfare, just because it was so noisy and so bright that they were able to kind of use it to demoralize the people living in Vietnam. Here, they're essentially been reprogrammed, rather than clearing land. They've been reprogrammed to impede Mega Man, since they don't seem to do any damage to the scaffolding or the environment itself. They just seem to be in place to blow up Mega Man. So it seems like the detonation on these things has been calibrated to where just enough to destroy Mega Man, but not enough to actually destroy the structures around it. The next enemy that we run into is the Screw Bomber. At least that's the American title. Canonically, these things were designed to be sprinklers, like a fire suppressant system. To me, I thought that was sort of another kind of silly explanation for them. I think they really do just look like a kind of a high-tech security emplacement. In fact, I was looking kind of at old World War II defense structures, and there's one called the 20P7, and it's basically looks very similar to the Screw Bomber, where it's a cylindrical defensive emplacement. It could have guns that point out 360 degrees. In fact, the whole thing, at least some versions of the 20P7, could actually rotate, and so it makes me think that maybe there was some inspiration there for the design of this thing, and the fact that it's small, but not so small as to be a water sprinkler, because it's roughly the size of Mega Man, so it seems a little too big to be a water sprinkler, but probably just the right size to be intended as some sort of security emplacement. And we know that this isn't the first weapon that Dr. Light would have created for security, because as we go along, we actually run into something called the Beak, which is canonically a security emplacement. It looks like a sort of like a light fixture. Seems like it was kind of designed to hide in plain sight. Like if you've ever walked in like a mall or a big shopping area like a Walmart or a Target, you see those black hemispheres kind of hanging from the ceiling. You probably know those are security cameras, but they're sort of camouflaged in such a way that you don't really see them as security cameras subconsciously. You just kind of see them as a fixture, and you don't really know what the security camera is looking at because it's obscured by this big black orb. But I think this is kind of the same sort of ideal, is that you could hide these guns behind this beak-shaped structure, and then if things go south, all of a sudden you've got your security emplacement right there that can be your first line of defense. And so and then of course that enclosure serves as a shield, so it actually is strong enough to deflect Mega Man's shots. You have to time your shots to hit the thing to destroy it. Also, I noticed these things tend to show up at the kind of the threshold between areas. So it's like if you're climbing through what might be sort of an architectural choke point, these things seem to be there to prevent you from proceeding. And then a quick note about the spikes here. So the spikes, I got to looking at that and looking at the electrical engineering chart, since we're sort of in the vein of looking at electrical engineering symbols to kind of match with our theme of robotics, is that this looks like the symbol for an amplifier. And so amplifiers, of course, they boost electric signals. Also, what was interesting is that in alchemy, the triangle can represent fire. And so you've got two sort of hazards represented by the triangle. You've got electricity and fire. And of course, if you touch these things, it means instant death for Mega Man. And then, of course, if you turn this thing upside down and paint it yellow, you've got a caution sign. So another layer of symbolism here is that you should be careful around spikes. And in fact, most people, when I see them play Mega Man and they run into these spikes, and it doesn't matter if you're playing 1 through 6, right? People tend to slow down and get real nervous around spikes, especially if you're playing a version of Mega Man that has a lot of knockback or a lot of opportunities to be knocked back. Touching the spikes, that's game over, man. So the next enemy we run into is the Sniper Joe, and according to the canon, this Sniper Joe robot was a mass production model for security, designed for security purposes. And this is where I wanted to kind of touch back at a theme that I mentioned about how the more humanoid a robot is, the more that robot was designed to interact with humans. So it seems kind of like common sense, but all the enemies up until this point have had sort of this very singular purpose sort of built into them. Like the bomb is meant to be a bomb. The little flea things were meant to be either drive off pests, or if you go with my version, they're meant to be sort of a spot welder. They don't really resemble a humanoid form, but these guys do. These Sniper Joe guys do. And I think, given that they've got a gun and a shield, they were designed as a police force for Monsteropolis. They've got a shield that is strong enough to block the Mega Buster, and if you look carefully, his gun is actually, the Sniper Joe's gun is actually bigger than Mega Man's. So this is another callback to the fact that Mega Man carries a weapon that is largely underpowered, and it seems appropriate because Mega Man is sort of portrayed as a pacifist, and you've got this security model with a bigger gun, and he tends to be a lot more dangerous. In fact, if you try to just skip past these guys, they will jump after you and get very aggressive. And so they're designed for defense and security, and these guys have been repurposed to stop Mega Man in his tracks. And also, we can hit the second theme that I mentioned about the evil eye. So if you look carefully, Sniper Joe has a single dot eye. You see this this eye kind of prominently portrayed in the movie 2001 Space Odyssey. Hal has got the single red dot eye, and that's immediately what Sniper Joes make me think of this sort of malevolent AI. And like I said before, this evil eye theme, we're going to see it repeated all over the place in Mega Man. And so this is just the kind of the first place that I'm going to point out right here, is that all of the bad guys, all of the really bad guys, especially the annoying enemies, seem to have this evil eye motif, which I think was probably extracted from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I think even 2001: A Space Odyssey got the idea of the evil eye from even older places of literature. And so this thing is sort of a callback to the Eye of Sauron, which isn't really physically manifest, but it's more of sort of a mental impression that Sauron sends out, and it's described as sort of a fiery yellow cat-like eye. It's not a human eye. It's this animalistic thing that is always watching. And so that's sort of the idea, I think, that maybe they were going through with this, is sort of this evil single-minded determinedness as this the theme of the evil eye. And so this won't be the last time that we see that. The next enemy we run into is the Killer Bullet. If you saw in my last video, the symbolism of Castlevania, this ought to remind you of the Medusa enemy that travels in a sort of sine wave pattern. According to the canon, This was used as an industrial bomb for destroying distant targets. So sort of in the same vein as the bomb, that it's meant to sort of clear areas out, except instead of having to drop it, you can actually launch this thing out. And another thought I had about this is that the wavy pattern suggests that maybe there was a failure in the reprogramming, that maybe this was intended to travel in a straight line, and then when Bomb Man took control of all of the land clearing bombs and attempted to program them to destroy something that wasn't for land clearing, when he tried to target Mega Man, maybe there was some flaw in the programming, and so it seems like it's fighting its programming. And then one more thing to note about this enemy is that it's got this menacing grin on it, and this is probably a callback to the fact that bombs and missiles were often painted, especially by American military. It was sort of a way to boost morale. It was often common that, especially in the Air Force, they would paint their airplanes, and this practice sort of extended out to their missiles. And so you had everything from centerfolds being painted on the sides of missiles to pithy messages. And so I think that is probably why we've got these kind of shark-like grins on the sides of these killer bullets. I think it's a reference to that. The next enemy we have, and Bomb Man's level is kind of special in that we're running into all of these enemies for the first time. And so this next enemy is called Spine. Canonically, this was actually created by Wily. So this was not just a robot, an industrial robot that existed beforehand that was hijacked. This was actually specifically created by Wily to slow down intruders. And I think that fits, because these things are super annoying. They're just low enough that you cannot shoot them with the Mega Buster unless you kind of jump up from a lower platform. So if you're on the same level as they are, you can't actually hit them. Of course, I'm immediately reminded of Star Wars once again. In the 1977 Star Wars, you had these little mouse droids that kind of scooted around, and it has a very similar shape to these spines. And I feel like I've seen this particular robot design in an anime before, but I was drawing a blank and my research was failing me. So if anybody knows in the comments where they've seen this particular shape or design, like I remember reading the Mirage run of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it's got sort of this type of robot that appears in, I think it was the first 2 or 3 issues. You see these little low-profile robots, and that's kind of initially what I thought, but I feel like I've seen this in an anime somewhere before, and so that's what I think maybe the design for this might have been inspired by. Moving on, we've got the Flying Shell. Canonically, the Flying Shell was designed for recon purposes, and I agree. I think this thing was definitely some kind of recon probe. You could make another Star Wars reference here if you wanted. It's got a nice round shape. And it also, if you guys have seen Alien Prometheus, where they have that little orb that they throw into a cave, and it kind of has this laser and it kind of emits a laser pulse, and they use it to sort of survey the cave. I was kind of looking up to see if there was technology like that, that they might have based that off of. And by they, I mean the creators of Prometheus. And yes, there's something called LiDAR, and basically they use light in the same way that sonar uses sound to map an area. And so I can see that this flying shell could be equipped with such a thing, where you need to survey the land, you need to figure out what parts need to be leveled or bulldozed or filled in to make sure you have a nice flat area to build your giant energy processing system. In this case, though, these flying shells have been outfitted with bullets instead of surveillance equipment. And again, we've got that orange color, which, if we're talking in the language of industrial colors, this is sort of a caution, or to make it stand out, or that it's filled with energy, that type of thing. Orange is a fairly common color used in construction. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly where it ranks. I know yellow is the most common, red is the second most common construction color, and I believe orange was definitely in that top 5. So kind of speaking to the level as we progress on, there is sort of an unfinished aspect to this level that I think there might have been some technical limitations, but also I think it kind of gives it a construction feel. Like this is like a new area, lots of scaffolding. We get to our first boss gate here, but we'll kind of touch more on the boss gate because we've kind of dumped a lot in just the boss man stage, and we still have 5 more to go. Also, this is the first appearance of the octopus battery. I'll elaborate more on this just to kind of spread out our encounters with each enemy. So here we're going to drop into the center of operations where Bomb Man has been coordinating the strikes against us. But before we get too far into that, I just wanted to talk about the sort of overall structure of the level. It's like a giant, if you look at the map kind of all in one go, it looks like a giant set of stairs. And so you're climbing this giant scaffolding, and then at the very top you drop down on top of this sort of hardened control center, like a foreman's office almost. And so when we drop into Bomb Man's area, we get our first sort of encounter with what the meme for Mega Man bosses will be. You'll get the powering up of the boss. You'll see his life bar power up. The boss will appear after the screen flashes. All of these warning signs, like, oh man, here we go. You're about ready to fight a serious enemy. This isn't like anything else you've seen up until this point. And then in comes Bomb Man. What's kind of interesting, most of these bosses have some sort of pose that they do. And I think this pose is sort of maybe a callback to Kitamura's fascination with tokusatsu, Super Sentai, Ninja Captor, where they would do a pose, but some sort of dramatic action pose before fighting. And so Bomb Man, he's got this sort of cavalier approach where he casually tosses the bomb he's holding in one hand. So he's got kind of a devil may care attitude with high explosives. And so right as soon as he shows you that he's super confident with his bombs, he starts jumping around. It's very reminiscent of the Flea enemy, so he's clearly used to navigating uneven terrain. And something to kind of think about while we're fighting these robot masters is that these were all designed largely for some sort of industrial purpose, and that they've been reprogrammed to be hostile. So they're not designed for battle, but at the same time, like imagine you were to get in a fight with like a tunnel boring machine like that, and you're head on with it. That would be pretty scary, but there's some critical weaknesses kind of built in. Like if you can flank the tunnel borer machine, then you're in the clear, because that thing is not going to be able to turn around, and you can get around it and rip its battery out. And I think it's the same sort of principle here, is that Mega Man goes into it with a weapon designed to take these robots down, albeit a bit underpowered, but it's enough that he has a methodology to go in and pacify these robot masters, whereas these robot masters were built for some sort of industrial purpose, some sort of either creative or serving in the purpose of creating or expanding or improving Monsteropolis. Another thing to note is that we're in a small little room, and Bomb Man is probably having to limit the payload of his explosives, so that way he's not getting caught up in his own explosives. So I like to think that maybe this level is forcing Bomb Man to kind of fight with one arm behind his back. And then another thing to note is that when these bosses are defeated, they blow up just like Mega Man blows up. So when Mega Man blows up, he blows up in sort of a firework of destruction. And the fact that right when the fight starts, you get this life bar that powers up for the boss. It's the same sort of life bar that you have. It suggests that Mega Man and Bomb Man and all of the Robot Masters are running on the same sort of quasi-infinite power supply, and that once it's been breached and ruptured, it becomes unstable and just explodes out in a very spectacular fashion. And so we get the weapon. So it's interesting to note that when you destroy Robot Master, they leave behind a symbol, presumably some sort of weapons module. It's represented by a plus sign. If we were to kind of dig into the symbolism for the plus sign, it represents, of course, addition, and which makes sense because we're adding a weapon to Mega Man's arsenal. It's a physical assumption of abilities. And then if we look at, in the language of programming, the plus sign can be the and, like if you do sort of a bit arithmetic, it's the and symbol. When you add two bits together, that is a different operation than when you're ORing or AND/OR or XOR. Just whatever logic we're dealing with, this would be the AND operator. And so in this case, it's the weapon system is now the Weapon Buster and something else. And so now with each of these that we pick up, Mega Man becomes slightly more lethal and a little less pacifistic as he essentially cannibalizes his brothers. And then if we look at the plus sign is actually sitting inside of a circle, which if we're still speaking in the symbols of machines, circle is the off state, and then the 1, of course, is the on state, and then combined together it becomes a toggle switch. The circle can also represent unity, and so when we combine the plus sign with the circle, you get the idea that Mega Man is unifying with some element of his enemies. And so when Mega Man actually activates these weapons, he's essentially unifying himself with the element of his enemies. In this case, the element would be the element of the bomb, an element of destruction. And so following the idea of weaknesses, Gutsman is weak to the hyper bomb, which you pick up from Bomb Man. And so let's dig into that level. So Gutsman stage is essentially another construction site, except this one's more overtly a construction site because you've got the yellow and black sort of caution boards, the kind of the sawhorse barricades that are used to sort of fence off construction areas. Gutsman is a robot that was designed for construction, for moving heavy items and for moving boulders in particular. But I mean, if you look at design, even his jaw looks kind of reminiscent of a bulldozer. Gutsman also happens to be heavily damage resistant. And if you think about bulldozers and construction equipment in general, it's designed to be heavily resistant. Like when I think Gutsman, I think tank tread. Like this guy is just pure fortitude, heavy duty constitution. And I think there's probably some sort of industrial assembly line here where we've got this level which appears to have been recently cleared, possibly by Bomb Man, or as we'll understand, Cut Man is also responsible for land clearing. So he's setting up his construction barriers and preparing the site for brand new, maybe he's laying a foundation or setting up some scaffolding. It's important to note that this entire region is basically a very mountainous region. If you watch the Castlevania video, we talked about the symbolic significance of mountains as they apply to holy symbolism, especially Christian symbolism. But if we were to take the mountain and sort of apply it here, this is not a holy symbol. This is more of a characteristic of nature. It's an obstacle that is being leveled. So we're taking a symbol of pure nature and we're going to level it out, or at least build on top of it. We're going to expand the sprawl of Monsteropolis. So not really a holy symbol here. It's more of just a raw symbol of nature. And it's also a symbol of rocks and boulders, and that all fits nicely within the Gutsman aesthetic. So the first enemy that we run into is called the Met. And this enemy, I believe, this is one of the few enemies that appears in almost every single Mega Man game. So if you've ever played any Mega Man game, you've probably seen this guy. And so just check out this clip about how Met got his name.
気づいた方いるかもしれないですけど、オールメットです。
オールメット。
はい。
メット。
すべてはオールですよね。でヘルメットはメットですよね。
はいはいはい。
オールメットなんですよ。
オールメット。はいはい。
でもオールメットよりもメットオールの方がいいじゃん。
メットオール。
メットオール。メットオール。メットオール。バザー。
So whether you call it the Met or the Metal, now you know where that came from. So I think, as far as the original purpose of this robot, is he seems to be some sort of inspection robot. He's going around checking to make sure the construction zone that's being established is up to code, whatever that code may look like for Monsteropolis. And for some reason, I thought that these guys moved in Mega Man 1, but they don't. They're almost like a turret. They peek out every now and then, they shoot a few bullets at you, and then they hide. Now, I know in the other games, for sure, they move, but for some reason, when I replayed this, I was like, okay, why isn't this guy moving? I know they move. But yeah, that was a false memory on my part. I'd be curious to know if anybody else thought that they moved in the very first game. So playing into the construction aesthetic, they have a hard hat. And then that hard hat, it's actually strong enough to deflect the Mega Buster, which is pretty cool. So presumably it can defend against all kinds of falling debris as well. And then as we go a little bit further, we run into our first real look at the conveyor system. This sort of obstacle appears in other parts of the game, but this looks like it was designed to carry heavy loads, probably moving debris as they tunnel through a mountain, or clearing out areas for paving roads. They've got to do something with all those debris, and so this system looks like it was set in place to sort of dump that debris down into a valley. The next unique enemy we run into is called the Blader. According to the canon, this is just another reconnaissance bot. I think this was probably more built to survey land. Looks like it could probably fly up pretty high and then survey what the sort of topographical characteristics of a given plot of land are. That way, Gutsman or Bombman or Cutman know what needs to be cleared and what needs to be shored up, where the roads need to go, how the logistics are going to flow for the construction of Monsteropolis. These guys have a similar green color, and I didn't mention it earlier, but the Sniper Joes have a sort of a very particular shade of green that, if you look at sort of the negative and technological symbolism and sort of combine those two things together, you get sort of a sinister AI symbolism or sinister technology, because usually green, if you look at just the negative symbolism for the color green, it's usually like toxicity or poison, but can also be like hazardous waste. And then looking at the green from a technological point of view, it can be like the color of PCB circuit boards, right? And so when you try to combine these two things together, right, basically breaking the symbols apart and then combining their collective meanings together, you get sort of this idea of a sinister AI. And so here we have the Bladers. They're basically the same shade as the Sniper Joes that we ran into earlier, and we're going to see this particular shade of green later on, basically representing a corrupt AI or a hostile AI. Going on a little bit further, we run into the Picket Man. And in the canon, these are basically described as Mets with bodies. And it makes sense. It looks like the Met enemy that we saw at the very beginning, but now he's got a full body, and he just tosses his work implement at you. He just tosses pickaxes. And following into this theme that we mentioned earlier, these guys are humanoid, so it's likely that these guys are meant to work side by side with their human counterparts. And I think it's interesting that these guys have a shield similar to the Sniper Joes, so it makes me think that Dr. Light developed a sort of all-purpose humanoid platform that he's then basing all these mass production models off. So he's got this generic, general-purpose robotic humanoid platform, and then depending on the attachments that he hooks onto these things, you get either a Sniper Joe or you get this Picket Man guy. So it shows that Dr. Light isn't all just a altruistic pacifist. Like he's got a mind for logistics. He's got a mind for being able to scale his operations. So continuing on, we kind of run into these construction trusses. It's basically a skeleton. It's like a proto support for what we saw in Bombman's stage. And then if we keep going, we descend from the mountaintop. And so again, if we kind of zoom out at this level, it's basically one straight line, which is we're basically traveling over the tops of these mountains, and then we descend down. And if you watch my Castlevania video, we've got a little bit of symbolism of the fall, but this one's not as direct. But there is a symbolism of the descent. We're coming from the top of the mountain and we're descending down into a cave. We've got cave symbolism here. Now it's not an unholy cave, but it is a cave of the beast. And there was a video I did recently about talking about how bears hibernate in caves, and if caves are a sort of portal to the underworld, then the bear hibernating within could be a sort of devil or a beast waiting within. And here that fits pretty well because Gutsman is the largest, most menacing robot, and he also reappears quite a bit in the Mega Man series writ large, but he's waiting for us in this cave. But before we can reach Gutsman, we run into another enemy. This enemy is called the Big Eye. Now, according to the canon, this guy is a surveillance bot. I don't think that fits at all. This thing is gigantic. He's like 3 or 4 times the size of Mega Man. He deals a ton of damage if he touches you, and he just sits there and is an absolute bullet sponge. You can just sit there and unload on him, and he will, I can't remember exactly how many shots, but it just seems like it takes forever to kill these things. And they attack by trying to crush Mega Man. And it's also very, very slow. It just does not seem like a very effective surveillance robot. I think these things were built to defend highly sensitive areas. And I think you guys might agree with me as we go on, because these guys always appear by big gates or right towards the end of a level, right before we get to the Robot Master. These guys are patrolling around, preventing anybody from coming in. So I think these guys were purpose-built for defense. I don't think the surveillance moniker fits very well. But what does fit well is that the fact that these guys have an evil eye. Here it is, the evil eye symbolism. So kind of diving into the evil eye symbolism a little bit more, we kind of talked about, where that comes from. Does it come from 2001 Space Odyssey? Well, we can go back. We go back and we look at Lord of the Rings. Well, it goes back even further. So if you look at ancient Greek, they had something called the kakomati. And the idea of the evil eye in ancient Greek was that if you look at it, or if you visualize it or think about it too hard, the evil eye can make you sick, or it brings you bad luck. So in this case, the evil eye, instead of giving Mega Man bad luck, the evil eye is seeking direct intervention. It's directly trying to crush Mega Man, or if it's coming from the Sniper Joe, to shoot him up. So finally we work our way into the cave where Gutsman is waiting for us. And his opening animation, he laughs. He's laughing at us. And I think it's almost like he's amused at how small you are, because he's twice as tall, twice as wide, it seems like. And it also seems like he almost embraces the reprogramming. Like maybe Gutsman was never into building things. Maybe he likes just tossing boulders and construction equipment around. So Gutsman, right off the bat, he will jump up and down. This guy is so heavy that when he lands, he actually immobilizes Mega Man, and at the same time, the shockwave causes debris to fall, which he expertly catches and then throws. And it seems appropriate that the only thing that really can penetrate Gutsman's armor is the Hyper Bomb from Bomb Man. It does a significant amount of damage. It's a pain in the butt, though, to actually use, because you throw the bomb and then Gutsman jumps out of the way, and then you've wasted your bomb. It would have been nice if you could just detonate the bomb on command. But then again, that probably would have made the fight a little too trivial, so maybe this is okay. So maybe just attempting to predict where he jumps is enough of a balance here. Just, I guess, depends on what your thoughts are on that. Now, you can defeat him with the Mega Buster, but it's just a lot more satisfying to just blow this guy up. When you get the Super Arm weapon, which is what Gutsman drops, Mega Man becomes brown. Brown is the color of Earth. It's the color of rocks and mountains, which seems appropriate considering where we're at and where we get the weapon. Mountains are known for being rugged and durable and heavy and strong, and Mega Man likewise becomes physically strong. He's able to tear out pieces of the environment and toss them around the area, making for a great little weapon and almost a kind of a quasi-Metroidvania, which we'll touch more onto that later, but there is an element of that here. So let's continue on. So the next Robot Master on the list would be Cutman. Cutman is weak to the Super Arm, so that's where we're going to go. So Cutman's weapon is called the Rolling Cutter. According to the manual, Cutman was designed as a lumberjack, and similar to Bomb Man, he is designed for land clearing, specializing in lumber harvesting. So this is an interesting stage. So we've seen kind of different phases of Monsteropolis development. So Bomb Man, you've got this brand new construction that looks like they're almost done with it. And then Gutsman, that area, there is no construction. Looks like the land was just cleared. And then with Cutman, this stage looks like sort of a crumbling prison. So it's like Cutman was sent out here to clear this area out, but he hasn't even started yet. And especially in contrast to Bomb Man's sector, this area is run down. You've got these prison bars, so it does seem like an older area of Monsteropolis. So it's interesting that we kind of see the varying stages of history and of development of Monsteropolis just communicated through the level design, which I think is fantastic. You would almost assume that we would get a woodland level for Cutman because he should be running around cutting trees, but perhaps this was his assignment. This is the land that he was meant to reclaim. Many of the enemies you find here are actually duplicated or can also be found in Bomb Man stage, so it suggests that Cutman was meant to come in here and set up bombs and demolition charges to clear these buildings out. Or it could also suggest that in contrast to Bomb Man, who was kind of just doing his job, Cutman might be trying to lure Mega Man into a structure that can be better militarized against Mega Man. Maybe Cutman figures that a crumbling prison is going to be easier to set up an ambush than maybe a relatively more open forest area. It looks like, despite this being sort of a derelict area, the prison security has been reactivated because there's lots of little security stops, lots of security emplacements that are online and attempting to stop Mega Man's progress. So if you look at the map of this level is basically a building that we climb up the side of and then descend down, essentially rappel down the other side of, which I thought was a cool touch. So basically we have to ascend through these broken down prison blocks just to get to what seems like maybe a warden's office. At least that's kind of the feel that I got going through this level. And one part of the level that kind of stands out in particular is you got like this laundry chute that maybe this at one point was used by the inmates to dispose of their dirty laundry, but now it's been repurposed to fling what appears to be Cutman's rolling cutters are just spewing out of this thing. So it's like definitely a trap laid by Cutman to try to get Mega Man before he can get any further, which kind of ties into the idea that I put forth earlier about somehow Cutman choosing this as sort of a way to ambush Mega Man. And here we run into the Octopus Battery. We kind of mentioned him earlier, but I want to kind of go into depth here. Canonically, these are described as a adhering barricade, which kind of makes sense because when we saw him in Bomb Man, these things are all over the tunnel descent in front of Bomb Man. Like it's almost impossible not to get hit by these things as they kind of roam back and forth. However, think the name of this enemy kind of gives it away. It kind of maybe defies what the canon says. So it's an octopus battery. So it makes me think that this thing was probably designed as a auxiliary robot that goes around and gives other robots a charge. So basically, like, imagine you're in your hyper-futuristic electric vehicle and it dies on the road, and you call AAA, and instead of sending out some dude with some jumper cables, they send out an octopus battery, and it just attaches to the side of your car and wirelessly charges your vehicle, and then you're up and going again. So that's kind of what this makes me think of, is like maybe they've got some battery powered robots. Maybe you have like a battery of or an arsenal of Sniper Joes lined up on a wall, and if they're running low on charge, then you can deploy an octopus battery and basically charge up your police force on the fly. And then you could argue that now that they've been reprogrammed, whenever they touch Mega Man, they deliver a dangerous level of energy in the form of an electric shock, and that's what is damaging Mega Man when he touches these batteries. And then again, these aren't quite as menacing, but you could make a case that these guys fall inside the big eye, evil eye motif. These eyes aren't quite as menacing as like the Sniper Joe or the big eye sentry things that leap around and try to crush you, but you could make a case that it sort of falls in there. It's almost cartoonish the way these things look, but it's at least part of that family of symbols. And so as we make our way into what I feel is like a warden's office, essentially, we encounter Cutman. And Cutman's opening animation is he pumps his hands, and as he does so, the shears on the top of his head close, so it's like he's holding a giant pair of scissors. So I thought that was a very nice touch by the developers. He's basically, instead of running his finger across his neck, he's pumping his rolling cutter on top of his head. menacing you, saying, "This is what I'm going to do to you, Mega Man." Cutman has very similar agility to Bomb Man, which suggests that he too is meant to traverse uneven terrain. Something else to note, I was talking with my brother about this, is that Cutman was probably designed to be the first robot master that you fight, because when you hit him with the Mega Buster, he actually slides backwards as if he's actually weak to the Mega Buster, and it shows. Like a couple of shots from the Mega Buster and you're gonna win, because you can kind of control where the boss gets to stand. However, if you have Gutsman's super arm ability, you can basically just kill him in 2 hits. And so it's kind of funny. When I was recording the gameplay, I actually killed him too quickly, and I had to redo the fight just to get some decent footage of the Cutman fight, because I think I killed him too quickly 2 times in a row, and I was like, okay, I gotta slow down and kind of jump around a little bit to actually have some footage of this fight. But yeah, Cutman goes down very quickly with Gutsman. So I think what that suggests is that he's pretty lightly armored. The fact that he's kind of weak to the Mega Buster and that he's insanely weak to the Gutsman super arm weapon suggests that he's lightly armored, which might explain why he can jump so high, why he's so mobile in general. This concludes part 1 of Mega Man 1. The audio that I took was getting pretty lengthy. It was pushing 2 hours, so I decided let's break this one up so I can spend a little bit more time diving into things without making this thing some kind of feature-length presentation on the symbols of Mega Man. So if you've made it this far, I want to sincerely thank you, and I appreciate you, and I'm going to be reading the comments to see what you guys had to think about it, and I will catch you guys in the Symbolism of Mega Man Part 2.